Welcome to the Play Podcast with me, Douglas Schatz. Hello and welcome to episode 67 of the Play Podcast, where we explore the greatest new and classic plays. I'm Douglas Schatz, founder and host of the Play Podcast. The curtain rises on an inner-city football pitch, surrounded by a red wire fence and by scaffolding more recently erected to build new blocks of flats. Two young friends are playing football, watched intently by a third who is in goal. They're really going for it. There is grabbing, hard tackles flying in, and sweat pouring from their faces. Eventually, one of the boys scores to end the game. He is humble in his victory, his opponent disappointed and reluctant to concede defeat. It's a familiar scene of sporting rivalry played out on countless pitches around the world. This pitch happens to be situated in South London, and the boys are 16 years old and black. Their neighborhood is on the brink of change from urban regeneration, and the boys are facing displacement and their own life-defining choices. Tyrell Williams' debut play, Red Pitch, is a coming-of-age story with young men fighting to believe in their dreams and to find a way up and perhaps out of their changing community. It is a universal story of hope and ambition, friendship and family, set in a community that has traditionally seldom been portrayed or celebrated in our theaters, which is one of the reasons that I'm so excited to have the opportunity to talk today with the writer of Red Pitch, Tyrell Williams, and the director of the award-winning production of the play, currently on stage at the Bush Theatre in West London, Daniel Bailey. Hi, guys. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Douglas. How you doing? Hey, Douglas. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining me, and congratulations on the show. The play has had a wonderful reception. It was first performed at the Bush in February last year, when it won the Off West End Award for Best New Play, as well as several awards for Tyrell, including the Evening Standard and Critics Circle Theatre Awards for Most Promising Playwright, as well as the Stage Magazine Debut Award for Best Writer. Great stuff, as this is Tyrell's first work for the stage. Before this, he co-created, co-wrote, and directed the viral web series Hood Documentary, which has had over 4 million views and went on to be commissioned for BBC Three. Tyrell is currently on attachment to the National Theatre Studio, and a screen adaptation of Red Pitch is in the works, as well as other TV projects. So I think we're lucky to catch Tyrell just as his writing career explodes. Daniel is a director, dramaturg, and writer, is currently the Associate Artistic Director at the Bush Theatre, which is currently leading the charge in championing theatre for all diverse communities. He's previously been the Associate Director at Birmingham Rep Theatre, Resident Director at the National Theatre Studio, Associate Artist at Theatre Royal Stratford East, and Resident Assistant Director at the Finborough Theatre. So that's the formal stuff over, guys. Tyrell, can you tell me first how you came to write the play? Is this place in South London where the pitch is located somewhere you know?
That's correct, yes. So I grew up on a council estate in South East London, and a lot of places in South East London are going through a lot of changes, aggressive changes, some may say. And the inspiration behind the idea came about when I was on the bus, and the bus was going past where my football pitch used to be. But at the time of passing it, the football pitch wasn't there anymore. There was a block of flats, new builds. And at this point, no one had been housed in them. So they were sort of arrogantly taking up space in a way that moved me to respond to that. And then I put something together, a 10-minute version, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago now. That's where Daniel and I really connected. And we did a 10-minute version of that. We won audience's favorite on the night because it was a part of a writers' festival. And Daniel was really strong in encouraging me that there's something here to keep pursuing. And a year later, we did an hour-long version. And then something happened. So, the world was locked down for 2 years. And during that period, I was still working on it, developing it. And then got the call from the Bush that it was something they may be interested in.
Oh, that's brilliant, but also heartbreaking that the origin of this thing, that it was the very pitch you played on, is gone.
Yes, it was called Big Pitch, and it was a pitch that we held quite close to us. And what's so interesting about the space was that it transcended its architecture. So it was more than just a space for us young people to play football. We'd go, we'd therapize, we'd talk about things that we were afraid of talking about at each other's homes, just in case our parents might hear. So it was a real safe space. And to lose it, there was something about those memories going and these new builds being built on top of those memories. So it felt like I had to respond to it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Daniel, what about you? What attracted you to the story here to get involved?
It's a story that I knew very well. I grew up in Neasden, where we had our own kind of cage and our basketball court and a football court that was, this whole thing amalgamated. As people will know in London, it's a court for everything, right? Including your debates and whatever else. So I grew up around it. And then when I moved west towards Greenford, it's a similar situation as well. We spent a lot of time in our cage and we spent a lot of time playing football on the estate. So it was something that drew me in because it was my story essentially, as well as T's story. So we kind of bonded on that. And when I first read that 10-minute version of it, it combined all the things that I love so much, which was football and theatre. So I was like, this is a no-brainer for me, which is why I've been a part of it for so long. And obviously because of this guy as well. But
yeah, well, football and theater don't go together that often, although it's weird that we have another play just on at the moment with the Dear England, of course, at the National, which we talked about on the podcast quite recently. But this is a different kettle of fish completely. Did you both have to move from where you were because of development in your estates?
I moved because, truthfully, my mum was a bit concerned about us growing up where we were at the time, even though we had such a wonderful community and the way we saw it was very different to the kind of wider social kind of voyeuristic view on it. But my mum wanted to give us a bit of a different opportunity. So she was like, let's move out of the estate. But where we moved to was a road, but at the top of the road was an estate anyway. So we had an opportunity to kind of have a different perspective, but still we kept to our roots because we'd only seen it as a positive thing. Yeah, so gentrification didn't necessarily affect me in that way until much later on.
Tyrell, how about you? Did you have to move because of development?
We will have to move. So the area that I'm in is quite big. It's quite a big estate. So they've taken on the regeneration. I use regeneration in inverted commas. They've taken that on in phases. So we're part of the last phase to go down. So we will eventually have to move.
This is the Aylesbury estate, is it?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so as I started doing a bit of research and came across the Aylesbury estate, which was described as the largest public housing estate in Europe.
Yeah.
But this is emblematic of all sorts of these kind of areas, isn't it? It was built, I believe, in 1963. It started as a so-called project of slum clearance, which went on after the war. I saw this program a few years back, which was concentrated on the stories of individual streets in London. And one of which was one of these East End streets that after the war, they just tore down all these Victorian terraced houses because they thought they were slums and replaced them with these high-rise estates, right? And thought they were giving them a brand new world of some kind. And of course, this thing goes round in cycles because what they did was destroy communities that had been there for a long time. And people felt isolated in these big tower blocks and had moved away from those communities and been forced to move away. So there's a story there that just seems to keep repeating, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah. I feel, it feels quite cyclical, and it also feels very apparent across various communities. It feels like a shared experience.
Yeah.
Not just in South London, but as BB was saying, West London, North London, East London. Hackney's quite renowned for the way that that's changed.
Yeah.
So it is cyclical and it's far too common.
Mm. It's really interesting because I think I watched a documentary that was quite similar. And on those roads, they created communities, right? People would go into each other's houses and that would be the thing. And when they created these big tower blocks, they thought there'd be much more of a community vibe. But they were also trying to solve a problem of, the influx of people that were coming into the UK and they just hadn't, they didn't have enough space or houses. So they were also trying to solve a problem that they created for themselves, which they don't really talk about. They talk about it as a social experiment, but we've seen the effects of what estates are. And it's not all bad, but a lot of the time, yeah,
This is what's at the heart of the play, of course, a fascinating question about what regeneration means, or one of the characters, says renewal, rather optimistically, where the refurbishment of the built environment results in change in the social demographic profile of the area, right? So people are priced out of the neighborhood they grew up in. But some of these terms are kind of loaded, aren't they? The kind of idea of regeneration, as you suggested, I guess, Tyrell, implies that there's something dead about it. And that's not true, is it? There is life in these communities, of course, but the built fabric just hasn't been maintained.
Exactly. And I think that's what the play is trying to discuss, as much as 16-year-olds could comprehend that. Because now when I walk through the area, none of my friends are there. It feels like a ghost town. When I look back and think about that period of when change was happening and how we perceive that change, it might not be as we perceive it as adults. Yeah. So, to 16-year-olds, they might be able to find the pros within the area changing, such as, a lift might be working for a relative that actually needs it. Or, they might not have mice in their house for a change, or their drains will be unblocked. There's those benefits of the changes, but they might not be able to actually process the cost of the community, the people that they've loved, that they've grown up with, that are going to have to leave.
The literal economic impacts of not being able to buy a house, or any of your generation be able to buy a space in the place that you grew up and lived in and perhaps love as well. I can imagine what that impact does for people. Again, priced out and moved out and pushed. And like this whole idea of ethnic cleansing that keeps happening in those spaces like Shoreditch and wherever else, that was built up by those different communities who were forced to live in those spaces and then suddenly been forced out.
It's an amazing cycle that happens all over Britain and all over the world. We did a play on the podcast called Clybourne Park, which you may know, which is set in America, and a fascinating cycle where the area starts off as white, working class, and then a first black family moves in and subsequent black families, and then it turns into a black neighborhood. And then that becomes a target for white gentrification again. So that's very much one of the themes at the heart of the play. One of the other big things is we were talking about just before we came on air, which was football, inevitably. And what is it about the dream of becoming a professional football, Tyrell, that attracted to you? Is that one of your dreams?
Yeah, it was definitely a dream of mine. And I think it's a dream amongst many people that grow up in that environment. Yeah, I think DB said it the other day. It's like a lottery ticket. If you become a footballer, that's it. Like, you've sort of made it financially, and you're going to be doing something that you love week in, week out as a profession. You're going to be traveling the world. It really does feel like a golden ticket. So everybody sort of aspired to that. And the harsh reality of it is that not many people will make it. And I think the play doesn't shy away from that.
Well, I also thought this trope of the dream of untold wealth and fame, of course, very much of our time in terms of football, and the money that's obviously there and the fame there. And the previous generation, and it still may apply, the whole idea of rock and roll as a way out, for example.
Music. Yeah.
Music also applies where, you could become a superstar. But it is, you say, it is a dream that too many people have, because the odds are definitely stacked against these boys, aren't they?
I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a very tiny, tiny percentage of young people that actually make it into the professional world of football. And even if they do make it into the professional world of football, to sustain a career within that, because they're short careers as it is, and to sustain a career in that is even shorter. So, I can't imagine what the percentage is. Probably 0.02% or something that actually make it into the Premiership. And then as you go down throughout the national leagues, it's completely different. So it really is a golden ticket. But I guess the thing for a lot of young people is that it feels like an accessible thing, right? It feels like something that can take you out of poverty or put you in the higher echelons of society in a way that, education can do, but might not be able to do as quickly or as accessibly as football, right? You don't need to be a genius in maths in order to be a really good footballer. You don't need to be a genius in English in order to be able to communicate on the football pitch. So these are all the things that for a lot of young people that, I can put in the same amount of work as I would put in at school, but do something that feels enjoyable, and it can propel me out of this world, literally.
It's also, athletically, you don't have to be the biggest, the strongest. Yeah. It's a sport that almost anybody can play in.
Yeah. But there's an interesting debate goes on in the play, isn't there, about pinning all your hopes on this kind of dream. And yet someone has to dream. You have to put in the work to become a great footballer, of course. And most of these things you have to do at the expense of almost anything else in your life. The whole 10,000 hours kind of principle, which says if you're going to get to the top, then you have to be completely obsessed and dedicated and determined. As Bilal, one of the characters, says, essentially, there's no other options, no other focus. You can't leave any time for anything else if you're going to try and succeed because it's so competitive. And yet that's not necessarily a sensible way to go about things if you don't have any alternatives.
Yeah, it brings me back to the point that I was going to mention earlier, in that so much is being discussed about mental health now with these academy players who don't go on to succeed because they do literally pin all their hopes and dreams on becoming professional footballers. And when that doesn't materialize, they sort of feel lost within the world, like what's next for them. And I think Bilal fits into that.
And the pressures of family and friends and people who are influential in your life, who kind of have that expectation for you as well. Like that is a massive thing to hold on your shoulders as a teenager, or even, as young as 8 and 9. You might not necessarily feel like that pressure is a tangible thing, but some way, that young person's storing that, that young person's thinking about it, that young person's experiencing it, whether it be in a physical way or not. They're experiencing that expectation of others as well as their own expectations.
That's absolutely true. And that's evident, particularly in the case of the character of Bilal in the play, which, not jumping ahead, but for the listeners who don't know the play yet, let's just give them a brief introduction to who these three characters are and what their situation is. And then we can delve a little deeper into how they're coping with these challenges.
Yeah, for sure. Start with Bilal, as he's mentioned. All three of them grew up on this council estate, this fictional estate called Rebury Estate, and they're childhood friends, and they share the dream of becoming professional footballers. And the players, we spend time with them in Red Pitch discussing their dream of becoming a footballer, as well as the politics of the changing area. Bilal is adamant that football is the only way. It's that or nothing else. As the play develops, you start to see the dream might be a dream that's one that's been imposed on him by his father, who also was aspiring to become a footballer but wasn't able to make it. And that's what he has to negotiate in his personal life. And then you've got Ohms, who he is a young carer for his ailing grandfather and his younger brother. And he has to contend with making sure that his grandfather is safe and is well looked after, as well as his younger brother. He wants to become a footballer, of course, but you get the impression that he's a little bit more realistic and is maybe more afraid to dream.
Yeah.
Just because of the reality of the circumstances. Exactly.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to believe that it could possibly happen and then get disappointed. And Red Pitch to him is like an escape. He loves being on Red Pitch because his home life is when he's at home, he's the adult. And Joey, he's a middle-class character. He lives with both his parents. They've got good jobs, stable jobs. They have a steady income. He feels the most precocious out of the boys as far as business is concerned and career and forward-thinking family. He's a real visionary in that regard.
I guess the themes that we speak about, we talk about masculinity, but we talk specifically about masculinity from this particular inner city estate and how that might transfer globally. And, the thoughts of mental health, even though it isn't explicit, as an adult or even as a young person, through osmosis, you kind of get a lot of those themes come out scene by scene, how they deal with each other, how they hold emotion, how they're not able to sometimes articulate their emotions. So this play really is about all those things. As much as it's about football and it's about futures and it's about friendship, it is about all of those things like masculinity and dreams and hopes and aspirations. And so it covers such a broad topic and in a very nuanced and fun and exciting and engaging way.
Yeah, it is great fun, by the way.
Yeah.
We're sounding very serious. It's also very funny.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
And full of energy and great joy as well at times. And the cast, I have to say, the cast do a great job, by the way, of bringing it all these characters' surface bravura to life, while also conveying their tensions and vulnerabilities. And they're also very clearly, as you've just described, distinctively drawn as characters, I think. And going back to Bilal, the pressure on these boys, he is the one who carries that the most, I think, isn't he? Because as you described, he is being driven partly by his father's aspirations as well, who, as you say, had a chance when he was younger, but had to give it up to look after his family. So he has some unfulfilled dreams of his own, which I guess he's seeing vicariously through his son. And Bilal certainly feels that. But it's interesting how lightly you suggest that that's what's happening to Bilal. It takes a while to figure out that this isn't just his own dream, that there's something being imposed on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the topic of pressure is really interesting, and you know, who's withstanding the most pressure. Because I think what Bilal's experiencing is really difficult, but his father's also someone that takes them after Nando's after winning the district cup. So there's still that element of love that's in that relationship between father and son. And then if I look at Ohms's situation, not only is his area changing, but his home situation is becoming incredibly unstable. And he has to become the adult that keeps everything together. Without him, everything will just fall apart. So he's under an incredible amount of pressure as well. So it's interesting to see how both of those characters contend with that. And Bilal brings that into Red Pitch, whereas Ohms uses Red Pitch as an escape.
Yeah, he tends to shy away from talking about what's going on in the pressures of his home life, doesn't he? And I assume from what you're saying and what we get from the play that there are no parents of his around. I don't know why, but is that true? And that he is the sole carer for his grandfather and his younger brother?
Yes, that's how we imagined it. His parents weren't around and he went to live with his grandfather, but his grandfather's getting older. So his grandfather was supposed to look after himself and his younger brother, but now that responsibility has fell to Ohms.
Yes, and his grandfather even is showing signs of dementia, and he's also getting frail, so that, you know, climbing the stairs in the tower block is a challenge. You're right, Tyrell, about the pressures that Ohms says at one point, I think quite tellingly, when Bilal is talking about his dad, and Ohms knows how hard his dad is on him. He says it's good to have someone that cares, though, as in at least you do have someone who cares for you. And it just brought home how alone Ohms is in that regard. And in fact, yes, he seems on the surface to be pretty strong, and he is strong. He is resilient. It's clear he's resilient. But he's also edgy and tense as a result of all these pressures he's carrying, isn't he?
You talk about Ohms quite a lot. You talk about how Ohms is constantly wound up, and he has that level of, for want of a better expression, a chip on his shoulder that he kind of walks with. But he's also such a lovable character and has so much love to give and has so much love to share. But he just hasn't quite found the way to articulate that, whether that be physical or emotionally intelligent, you know, that he's not able to really talk on it. And I guess by the end, without jumping too far, by the end of it, he goes on that journey really of how to express the things that are probably most challenging to him.
I think it's fascinating that they're dealing with at such a young age. They're dealing with a lot of shit, aren't they? That's bottom line. And it's brilliantly done that you see that. I was going to say earlier that one of the great joys of the play is how perfectly you've captured the behavior of these teenage boys, because they're in that time of life where they're on the verge of being men, but they're also still really just kids in many ways, aren't they? So you get both of those things going on in each of them. The way they big themselves up and the repartee between them, the teasing, the physical challenging, and they have these rituals and games, and the fact that they just still like Sun Pride juice and Twix as much as anything, you know. So that dynamic of their years is very well observed.
Yeah.
But also you were saying earlier about Bilal, about, you know, what happens when they don't succeed. And I don't want to give away spoilers, because actually this is just the beginning of their lives, and who knows what they might go on to do. But
Exactly.
he has a setback, if we put it that way, in the play in terms of this football dream initially. And actually he ends up bewildered. He ends up in a really poignant position, it seems to me, that he doesn't know what to do now or who he is. Because as you said earlier, Daniel, I think his identity is totally tied up in this expectation of what he is and what he will become.
Yeah, totally. And I guess that's the beauty of this piece, is that we're able to share that with so many people, and that we've all been through it at some point where we're at a crossroads of who we are, or, you know, even the thing that we've been fighting for and like studying for or dedicated our life to, that at some point we question whether it is our own dream, whether it's a dream of others, or whether it is something that we want to continue to pursue. And this character has to do that at 16 years old. I didn't have to do it until I was like in my late 20s, when I had a degree and whatever else, you know, so I could fall back into something. At 16 years old, this character's has to truly figure out. And that's one of the tragedies of our society right now, is that we're asking 16-year-olds to figure it out now. Like, when actually, you could be like, oh, okay, that didn't work out for me. Or there's another option here. There's so many other things that I want to do. But at 16 years old, he's got that pressure now of having to figure out his whole entire life and map it out. And, you can't see past tomorrow or something.
I mean, being teenage boys, they still have a pretty, say naive or obviously limited understanding of what the real world is. And Joey, for example, has some more maturity, potentially has some vision, as you said earlier, I think, of alternatives. He's taking a business law course and he talks about becoming a property magnate. Of buying and selling flats. He thinks if they can get all this money as a footballer or whatever, then we can buy these flats and sell them at a great profit. But of course, the classic is that he thinks he'll get £50,000 for the flat, which he thinks is the biggest number he can come up with, actually.
Yeah, that's a lot of money to
But on the other hand, he is sensible, Joey, isn't he? He's got some maturity about him in terms of this outlook.
Absolutely. I think that's a fair comment to make. I think which is so interesting about this whole idea of tearing communities apart, because you can really see how, as a triangle, they function. They all have their purpose. They all have their role. And Joey's definitely somewhat of a mediator between the two characters. And when he moves out, well, I'm hoping that the play sort of encourages the thought about tearing that friendship apart and those dynamics that Joey's obviously so crucial, is crucial in serving crucial function in that friendship.
Yeah, I mean, he acts as the peacekeeper, as you say, a lot of the time. The play is, as you say, all about these bonds of friendship and where do they go from this time of life onward and how important or otherwise are they? Because again, going back to how wonderfully you capture this teenage behavior, they are so in each other's pockets. I mean, they spend every moment that they can together virtually. Yeah. And that's so well observed too, because that is a time of life when we do that, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
We're completely absorbed in our own little world with these friends. And that can mean that you have all sorts of time spent where you have great moments of joy and excitement and laughs and all that. But you can also get frustrated and bored and angry with each other, which all of that happens too, doesn't it, in the course of what they're doing?
Of course. It's such a concentrated bit of time. And like, that was another thing that we spoke about quite a lot, which is, where do we set this, what time? And the summer holidays are such a significant point in people's lives. And I think that's a global thing, for a lot of people, they have a summer holiday break. And in that summer holiday break, you grow so much, but it's almost like a physical growth of, young people, when they've grown, they're dangly, but they haven't quite come to terms with their whole body yet. And I think that's like a bigger metaphor for these characters who are having to grow and they haven't quite come to terms with, one of them's leaving imminently, the other's leaving soon, the other's going to probably have to leave at some point. They've got to make those choices about college and they've got to make big choices in this moment of time when they're still kids, they're still vulnerable. They still have a limited understanding of the wider world, although they have a good understanding. It's still limited because they're still only 16. They haven't experienced a lot of stuff yet. I think summer holidays articulate that point so well, especially that summer holiday once you've left school or you've been the oldest in a place and then you have to start again and be maybe the youngest in a place. These are unwritten rules. There are no rules for this. To be a 16-year-old, you are on the cusp of adulthood, but yet you're not old enough to buy yourself a drink. You know what I mean? And everything comes accessible to you again suddenly. And like, how do you handle that? Summer.
They're also being forced to move as well, to separate potentially. Add to all that normal pressure, they also are literally being forced out to separate. They represent a community as well, in a sense. So the community as a whole is being dispersed as a threesome. How did they deal with that? And it's fascinating the way it builds towards that, because there's a powerful moment when Omar, I say Omar, Oms, it is Omar, isn't it? His real name is Omar?
It's Omar, yes. It's red. Yeah.
Sees red and deliberately lashes out at Joey in a dangerous tackle. And that's after they've been for their first football trial. And it provokes a fight between Bilal and Oms, both of whom, I guess, are hurting and frustrated by the trial. But it's also an explosion of pent-up stress and all these other issues, isn't it? It's an extraordinary moment and really powerful for an audience too. And I wanted to ask Daniel about staging that, because it's possibly the most convincing stage fight I've ever seen. They were really going at each other. And the audience the night I was there, we were gasping because we were fearful for those actors, for those boys. But it's also powerful psychologically, emotionally, thematically.
Yeah. I've been a young man in the city for a long time, and I know how quickly and easy it can boil over. I won't take credit for the fight itself because Kev McCurdy was the one who choreographed it and staged it, and he believes in true contact. But that moment is always there, and that's what the summer brings. That's what the heat brings. That's what being in a space that feels confined at some points and sometimes feels liberating brings, right? And as much as it is a physical fight that you gasp and you go, oh my gosh, these boys are hurting each other, although they're friends and been friends for a long period of time, that it could just take one spark to change everything. And that is what exists in the city. You know, we think about people who passed away recently, and you're like, how's that happen? And it's just one moment of madness that causes that thing. And it's always there under the surface. How we think about masculinity and how we share that and how we show that is something that those boys are used to. They talk about it earlier in the play when they talk about the fight that took place on the estate. And it is a foreshadowing of their situations. These things exist, right? They don't just come out of nowhere. There's a bubbling that happens. And then suddenly, when it's sparked in the wrong way, it results in that. And yeah, these are situations that we've been privy to, or we've maybe even experienced ourselves. I won't talk too much on that part.
Oh, like, because there's real blood on the wall of the pitch, isn't there, Tyrell, from this previous fight? So, you know, something even more serious has gone on before this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as DB mentioned, I think that fight also represents danger to these boys, to their friendship. As DB said, it's a foreshadowing moment. Its presence there is something that I really enjoy because it represents the past, but it's also present. There's just something very symbolic about it. And Bilal contributing to that as well. There's just something about legacy and space that feels really rich.
I think we also have a sense that this is really dangerous for these boys individually, partly because if they have a fracture as a result, a permanent fracture, which is possible, right? So they don't talk to each other for some time after, and you think this could destroy this friendship, this relationship. They're going to move away anyway, potentially, and they'll be on their own.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most telling things is that we feel this is bad, guys. This is bad for both of you to split apart, because then you're even more on your own in facing a world and challenges, which, you know, is going to be very hard. And one of the things at least you get from each other is some kind of mutual support, encouragement, love, care when you need it. And that if they break that, then, you know, we worry for them. We fear for that.
Yeah, the triangle is the strongest shape, right? The minute you take away one of those sides, that triangle no longer really exists. So there's something about what T's written here that really expresses that sense of loss and loneliness that could exist in just a moment like that, a real moment of madness that can tear something apart so quickly.
So did you think of the triangle as the strongest shape, Tyrell, when you conceived this?
I wish I did, but
subconsciously, yes.
Yes, he did. Of course he did.
And he was forced to only write 3 characters because of the finances.
I think it's more likely instinctive genius.
Exactly.
What about the 4-sided shape of the pitch? I thought that was also brilliant about the way you conceive and stage the show, because you basically create a little mini stadium. In a way, we're all the audience at the football match, so to speak. But it also felt like this pitch was really hemmed in. You had that real sense, as you've intended, of course, that this pitch is under threat by these developments going on around it. And there's some other great scenes. They do some dancing as well, Daniel, don't they?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I did it all, but I didn't. But yeah, they dance, and that came out of a conversation that we had with T and our literary manager, Deirdre. He spoke about writing a separate scene that allows us to see those boys in a slightly different light, that are just having fun, really, and expressing themselves in ways that only teenage boys could do. And the dance became part of that. It just felt like it was a light touch moment that actually became more and more significant the more we thought about it. And yeah, it just gave them a moment to settle and to sit and to interact with us, the audience, as well, because for our production, the audience are very much a part of their world.
Yeah, I can only echo that. We had like a really great creative team. I'm just going to give Daniel a lot of credit. How he told stories in those moments, like whether it's like, you know, you're going to hit me, I got to get back and get you one. So there are many stories within the story, like there are moments within itself.
I think the emotional journey that the play goes on and we as an audience do is really wonderfully managed because, as you just said, Daniel, that we have some moments of real joy interspersed between these tensions and fears as well. And the dance scene, certainly, they basically have come back from the party and are just high, not necessarily on any alcohol or drugs, but high on life.
Yeah.
They've met a few girls. And here's this classic, again, goes back to these teenage boys, Tyrell, that, you know, they talk about girls, but actually, I don't think they know all that much about them, do they?
I don't know. I have to agree with you. I think Joey thinks he knows the most, but I still think that there's some gaps in his knowledge.
Yeah, it's classic when he's bragging about, and in fact, he's not even bragging. He's just completely bewildered that he's had what he calls a proper conversation with a girl.
Yeah.
And that may have lasted about 30 seconds, frankly. Yeah, so they're full of bravado and all that, but they're still kids, really, in that respect. But it's touching to watch. But they come back high from this party, literally high on life.
Yeah.
And they start dancing and the music going, and the whole audience end up joining in. We were just clapping, and it was a great moment.
Yeah.
Where do we go next? Oh, I was just talking about that. One of the things that binds them, and that I was really enjoyed as well, is the language that they share. It's vibrant and distinctive to me, certainly. It's I presume, a language of South London dialect that you know, or even London dialect. I don't know, guys. What is it?
He's gonna take it as South London, but it's an amalgamation of inner city London.
Okay.
Because even the terms Bundesliga and that sort of stuff, the people that made that famous were actually from East London. So on a technicality, yes, there's loads of different colloquialisms that exist, but yes, T's experience is very much South London. So you can those young characters there is such vibrancy to that language, but I think there's so much honor that you've put into this piece, which is about, you know, those that have come before, that have influenced the language, you know, whether that be from the West Indies, Caribbean, or whether that be from West Africa and you know, in the Americas. And also, like, in many cultures of Africa and many cultures of the Caribbean, the religious aspect of it, you know, two of those characters are Muslim, one of those characters are Christian. So again, what those different cultures and communities have brought to this space, and that's what makes the language feel so alive and so colorful, because there's so many different aspects to it, which is definitely, I can now credit you for that.
I read actually somewhere that the Aylesbury estate, Tyrell, which you'll know, is very diverse. And you're right, that gives it a richness, of course. I want you to tell me, what does Bundesliga mean, Daniel? Come on, for the listeners.
I didn't write it.
I think I know, but for our listeners, Tyrell, come clean. Is this too rude to put out there?
It's not. Go on, talk on it. What is the Bundesliga first?
The Bundesliga is the German football league.
Ah, I knew that bit.
Yeah. And we have a rapper down here. I think Jay Huss is the one that we could credit to coining that phrase. But it's in reference to the bum, like the shape of someone's bum.
Derriere.
Okay, I got that.
And yes.
I got that without even having to look that up, actually. But I will confess, as I read the play, I actually was Googling some of the vocabulary.
Oh, nice.
And I've learned a few things, which is great. But actually, what I really appreciated is, as you say, the vibrancy, and it just binds these people together. It's a joy to watch and listen to the rhythms of their speech. It's just simple things like the way they greet each other and the repartee that flows with this language. It's very heartening because it shows how they're bound, I think, by the language too.
Language does so much. And this is why I have to give credit to T, because T spent a lot of time with young people absorbing, you know, a lot of that vernacular and colloquialisms, but also being able to communicate in such a way that you've had success stories with young people, and, you know, a lot of your young people come to see this play. And we were both youth workers. So again, that's another thing that bound us. So there was often times when we would talk about situations that we encountered with young people that perhaps found its way into the piece in some way, shape, or form. So that access of language is so well written that even if you don't know exactly what a thing means, you know, you have a kind of context in which to land that word in. That is a testament to the work that you've done and how you write these characters that are so well drawn. You know what their aspirations are, so you know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think I basically understood the gist of what was being said, even though I didn't necessarily get the translation. It's a bit like Shakespeare. I mean, I get the gist most of the time.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say it's Shakespeare with a pen and shit.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other characteristics you get perfectly about these teenage boys is that, as I think you may have said earlier, is that they're not very good about expressing emotion to each other either, are they? Of course. You have all those moments where they're just sort of sheepishly not saying what should be said. And then towards the end, we have this question about what is their futures? Where are they going? This is all up in the air, isn't it? They're all in the process of potentially moving out or have moved out of the neighborhood. Are they going to stay together, see each other? What sort of prospects personally do they have for what they will be doing in their lives? What do we think these boys' future holds?
I think that's for the individual to, yeah.
DB and I spoke about the ending for quite a while. And I think leaving that for the audience to decide was something that we were both really keen to do. So like all those questions, I'm so happy to hear you ask them, because that's what we were aspiring to achieve, like, for those seeds to have been planted. But those are the things that we want the audience to go away with and think about.
I've tried to ask various playwrights this question before, and no one ever answers it because, I mean, that is the point, isn't it? It's a fundamentally stupid question because actually that is the point. We don't know. And it's for us to imagine, and there are all sorts of possibilities. Are they going to pursue football or not?
Yeah.
Are they going to stay in touch? But I think what's more important is that we feel like it's better if they did.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I wondered, what does the deflated football sitting on the center circle mean? That doesn't seem so positive. Was that about the future of the pitch, Tyrell?
There is a line in that scene where Joey asks, do you think they'll close red pitch? And Bilal kind of responds, never, or I'll slap their heads or something to that effect. And again, I think it's just about creating those conversations and planting those seeds in audience's mind, like whether the ball is tying into that moment, whether it's a representation of their friendship, like it could be, it's down for interpretation.
Yeah. But it's purposely ambiguous, but also feels like something quite definite. And again, the hope is that people ask that question, like, what is the purpose of that flat ball, of that being the last image that we see of not just those characters, but of this story. Like, the geographical space has its own story and is its own character in itself. So, like, what does that mean for the space once you place that ball there and that's the last image you see? I ask you, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's suggestive of all those sort of things, because as you were talking, I was just thinking maybe it's just the end of childhood. As you say, it reflects the community's changing isn't going to be what it was.
Yes.
Everything's moving on in one way or another.
Exactly.
Actually, I was going to back up, and this is a rather personal question for you guys, I suppose, but I couldn't help but thinking when I saw the show and went to the bush and everything the bush is doing, about an analogy between the dreams of these young boys footballers and what your dreams must have been to become involved in the theatrical world, and how you've navigated that from where you've come from.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think for me, I've always enjoyed storytelling. That's something that I've always enjoyed, particularly in the form of writing. As I got older, I started to learn about directing and performing. But writing is something that I've always maintained an interest in. And in relation to navigating the industry, or sort of working my way into theatre, or working towards a professional production, I was fortunate to be introduced to a theatre close by to my home called the Young Vic Theatre, who did a lot of community projects. And I would frequently attend those. And then whilst I was in those spaces, I started to see people like Dan. And I think that representation was very important for me when I look back in hindsight, because they were people like me and they spoke like me and they came from a similar world to myself, and they were interested in the stories that I wanted to tell. And I think I really benefited from experiencing that quite early on whilst like going to theatres and stuff, because, you know, cliche is that it feels like a space that's not accessible for working class people of color. But then when I was seeing people that looked like me and their work that they were doing, I admired it, just sort of further enthused me and still believed that this was something, okay, cool, there's space for me, I could do this.
My story is quite similar. As much as I love football and grew to love it as much, of course, there's always a dream somewhere that you become a professional footballer. But actually, my dream from very early on was to work within the arts and to be a storyteller. There was so many people who I would maybe class now, my cousin would say actually sample. They're sample people, which, you only get one of them. And there were so many people that I used to interact with just on the estate or, in the world that I existed in, that I just felt like I never saw those guys on stage, and they had such rich stories and such brilliant ways of telling stories. And they just never quite found themselves on stage. So I always thought there has to be a vehicle somehow to get some of these stories of some of these people on the stage, because I felt like the world needed to see them. And like throughout my time, that's all I've been focused on, which is wild. I can actively say that I've been around doing this stuff for 15 years almost, that where I've managed to get those people on stage or in some way, shape or form out in the world, and just beyond my head and the memories that I have of people that I know. So yeah, I guess that was kind of my journey here. And again, like Tyrell, seeing people who looked like me or who spoke like me or who came from a place that I came from on the stage or making work was a massive, massive inspiration. And we seek to do the same thing now for all those young people that we've worked with or young people that are yet to come up and see that they can see a path that they can follow. And yeah, we're trying to lay that path out as clean as possible.
That's brilliant. It makes me think like these young dreamers, the boys that, don't give up.
Yeah.
But also you're right that so much is changing, that if people are there, like you, get involved and then tell the stories that you're telling, then the audiences also come. If you build it, they will come.
Right.
And then it's a cycle, right? It just keeps inspiring. And the Bush is doing a great job with that, as you two guys are. So it's great to hear your story and to see the results in Red Pitch. Thank you so much and congratulations. Before I let you go, one of the traditions of the podcast is I like to ask my guests to nominate or suggest a favorite play of their own that we might do on the podcast, or that's just a personal favorite, because I love to know and learn about new plays, as do our listeners. So Tyrell, is there a play that's inspired you or that you just personally love that you could recommend to us?
There's many, but I always go back to this play in particular because it sort of blew my mind formally, structurally, everything it did, and just how it worked so well. And it was actually a play here at the Bush called Misty by Arenze Kene. That play will stay with me forever just because of what it achieved and how it achieved it. Also a play that's discussing themes sort of gentrification and regeneration, but just the way that he told that story and the music as well. Shiloh, she's incredible. I think about that play all the time. And I think it was a brilliant piece of work. It really was.
It's a great suggestion. It has its own language too. How about you, Daniel?
A play that I'd probably mention, if I had to whittle it down, would probably be something called A Season in the Congo. That was on at the Young Vic. And for the same reasons, formerly, it managed to incorporate so many different forms of theatre, storytelling, and made it work in a way that I haven't seen a lot of plays do. And it is an historical play, so there's something about being able to make something that is so didactic in history and sometimes impenetrable feel so accessible, and it epitomizes a lot of what was happening in Africa in the 60s and 70s. For me, it just had such an impact on me being a storyteller and how we could tell stories and why we tell stories and why it's so important for us to understand history from every perspective.
Yeah, it's often interesting how history can make it easier through the lens of history to say things about our own time somehow. That's a great suggestion as well. I don't know that play. I will go and look it up. Thank you both very much. It's been a joy to talk to you about this great play, and congratulations on the show. As the curtain falls on these three teenagers, and many like them in cities around Britain, how do we rate their prospects? They will face seismic changes in the social and physical world they inhabit, and in their own personal life journeys, to which they will have to adapt to survive and thrive. What is certain is that in navigating these challenges, they will be stronger if they're able to hold on to the net of their friendship, for it offers the support of a home ground wherever they find themselves playing. Thanks for listening. See you next time. There are additional footnotes about this and every other play that we cover in the podcast available to our patrons. Patrons also enjoy exclusive access to the play review, bonus episodes in which I review current productions that I see in my regular theater going. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/theplaypodcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at The Play Pod and on Instagram at The Play Podcast. Thank you again for listening and for your support. See you next time.